Chapter 23 of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston LEROUX. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 23. The Tortures Begin.
The voice repeated angrily.
What have you done with my bag? So it was to take my bag that you asked me to release you.
We heard hurried steps, Christine running back to the Louis-Philippe room, as though to seek shelter on the other side of our wall.
What are you running away for?
Asked the furious voice which had followed her.
Give me back my bag, will you? Don't you know that it is the bag of life and death?
Listen to me, Erik,
sighed the girl.
It is settled that we are to live together. What difference can it make to you?
You know there are only 2 keys in it,
said the monster.
What do you want to do?
I want to look at this room which I have never seen, and which you have always kept from me. It's woman's curiosity,
she said, in a tone which she tried to render playful. But the trick was too childish for Erik to be taken in by it.
I don't like curious women,
he retorted.
And you had better remember the story of Bluebeard and be careful. Come, give me back my bag. Give me back my bag. Leave the key alone, will you, you inquisitive little thing?
And he chuckled, while Christine gave a cry of pain. Erik had evidently recovered the bag from her. At that moment the Viscount could not help uttering an exclamation of impotent rage.
Why, what's that?
Said the monster.
Did you hear, Christine?
No,
replied the poor girl.
I heard nothing.
I thought I heard a cry.
A cry? Are you going mad, Erik? Whom do you expect to cry in this house? I cried out because you hurt me. I heard nothing.
I don't like the way you said that. You're trembling. You're quite excited. You're lying. That was a cry. There was a cry. There was someone in the torture chamber. Ah, I understand now.
There is no one there, Erik.
I understand.
No one.
The man you want to marry, perhaps?
I don't want to marry anyone. You know I don't.
Another nasty chuckle.
Well, it won't take long to find out. Christine, my love, we need not open the door to see what is happening in the torture chamber. Would you like to see? Would you like to see? Look here. If there is really someone there, you will see the invisible window light up at the top, near the ceiling. We need only draw the black curtain and put out the light in here. There, that's it. Let's put out the light. You're not afraid of the dark when you're with your little husband.
Then we heard Christine's voice of anguish.
No, I'm frightened. I tell you, I'm afraid of the dark. I don't care about the room now. You've always frightened me like a child with your torture chamber. And I became so inquisitive. But I don't care about it now. Not a bit, not a bit.
And that which I feared above all things began, automatically. We were suddenly flooded with light. Yes, on our side of the wall everything seemed aglow. The Vicomte de Chagny was so much taken aback that he staggered, and the angry voice roared.
I told you there was someone. Do you see the window now? The lighted window, right up there? The man behind the wall can't see it. But you shall go up the folding steps. That is what they are there for. You have often asked me to tell you, and now you know. They are there to give a peep into the torture chamber. You inquisitive little thing.
What tortures? Who is being tortured? Erik, Erik! Say you're only trying to frighten me. Say it if you love me, Erik. There are no tortures, are there?
Go and look in the little window, dear.
I do not know if the Viscount heard the girl's swooning voice, for he was too much occupied by the astounding spectacle that now appeared before his distracted gaze. As for me, I had seen that sight too often, through the little window, at the time of the rosy hours of Mazenderan, and I cared only for what was being said next door, seeking for a hint how to act, what resolution to take.
Go and peep through the little window. Tell me what he looks like.
We heard the steps being dragged against the wall.
Up with you. No, no, I will go up myself, dear.
Oh, very well, I will go up. Let me go.
Oh, my darling, my darling, how sweet of you. How nice of you to save me the exertion at my age. Tell me what he looks like.
At that moment we distinctly heard these words above our heads.
There is no one there, dear.
No one? Are you sure there is no one?
Why, of course not. No one.
Well, that's all right. What's the matter, Christine? You're not going to faint, are you? As there is no one there? Here, come down. There, pull yourself together, as there is no one there. But how do you like the landscape?
Very much.
There, that's better. You're better now, are you not? That's all right, you're better. No excitement. And what a funny house, isn't it, with landscapes like that in it?
Yes, it is like the Musée Grévin. But, say, Erik, there are no torches in there. What a fright you gave me.
Why, as there is no one there.
Did you design that room? It is very handsome. You are a great artist, Erik.
Yes, a great artiste, in my own line.
But tell me, Erik, why did you call the room the torture chamber?
Oh, it's very simple. First of all, what did you see?
I saw a forest.
And what is in a forest?
Trees.
And what is in a tree?
Birds.
Did you see any birds?
No, I did not see any birds.
Well, what did you see? Think. You saw branches. And what are the branches?
Asked the terrible voice.
There's a gibbet. That is why I call my wood the torture chamber. You see, it's all a joke. I never express myself like other people. But I am very tired of it. I'm sick and tired of having a forest and a torture chamber in my house, and of living like a mountebank in a house with a false bottom. I'm tired of it. I want to have a nice quiet flat with ordinary doors and windows and a wife inside it like anybody else. A wife whom I could love and take out on Sundays and keep amused on weekdays. Here, shall I show you some card tricks? That will help us to pass a few minutes while waiting for 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. My dear little Christine, are you listening to me? Tell me you love me. No, you don't love me? But no matter, you will. Once you could not look at my mask because you knew what was behind. And now you don't mind looking at it, and you forget what is behind. One can get used to everything, if one wishes. Plenty of young people who did not care for each other before marriage have adored each other since. Oh, I don't know what I am talking about. But you would have lots of fun with me. For instance, I am the greatest ventriloquist that ever lived. I am the first ventriloquist in the world. You're laughing. Perhaps you don't believe me? Listen.
The wretch, who really was the first ventriloquist in the world, was only trying to divert the child's attention from the torture chamber. But it was a stupid scheme, for Christine thought of nothing but us. She repeatedly besought him, in the gentlest tones which she could assume.
Put out the light in the little window. Erik, do put out the light in the little window.
For she saw that this light, which appeared so suddenly, and of which the monster had spoken in so threatening a voice, must mean something terrible. One thing must have pacified her for a moment, and that was seeing the two of us behind the wall, in the midst of that resplendent light, alive and well. But she certainly would have felt much easier if the light had been put out. Meanwhile the other had already begun to play the ventriloquist. He said,
Here, I'll raise my mask a little. Oh, only a little. You see my lips, such lips as I have. They are not moving. My mouth is closed, such mouth as I have, and yet you hear my voice. Where will you have it? In your left ear? In your right ear? In the table? In those little ebony boxes on the mantelpiece? Listen, dear. It's in the little box on the right of the mantelpiece. What does it say? Shall I turn the scorpion? And now, crack! What does it say in the little box on the left? Shall I turn the grasshopper? And now, crack! Here it is in the little leather bag. What does it say? I am the little bag of life and death. And now, crack! It is in Carlotta's throat, in Carlotta's golden throat, in Carlotta's crystal throat as I live. What does it say? It says, it's I, Mr. Toad. It's I singing. I feel without alarm. Quack! With its melody entwine me. Quack! And now, crack! It is on a chair in the ghost's box. And it says, Madame Carlotta is singing tonight to bring the chandelier down. And now, crack! Aha! Where's Erik's voice now? Listen, Christine, darling. Listen. It is behind the door of the torture chamber. Listen. It's myself in the torture chamber. And what do I say? I say, woe to them that have a nose, a real nose, and come to look round the torture chamber.
Oh, the ventriloquist's terrible voice! It was everywhere, everywhere. It passed through the little invisible window, through the walls. It ran around us, between us. Erik was there, speaking to us. We made a movement as though to fling ourselves upon him. But already swifter, more fleeting than the voice of the echo, Erik's voice had leaped back behind the wall. Soon we heard nothing more at all, for this is what happened.
Erik,
Said Christine's voice.
you tire me of your voice. Don't go on, Erik. Isn't it very hot here?
Oh, yes.
Replied Erik's voice.
The heat is unendurable.
But what does this mean? The wall is really getting quite hot. The wall is burning.
I'll tell you, Christine, dear. It is because of the forest next door.
Well, what has that got to do with it? The forest.
Why, didn't you see that it was an African forest?
And the monster laughed so loudly and hideously that we could no longer distinguish Christine's supplicating cries. The Vicomte de Chagny shouted and banged against the walls like a madman. I could not restrain him. But we heard nothing except the monster's laughter, and the monster himself can have heard nothing else. And then there was the sound of a body falling on the floor, and being dragged along, and a door slammed, and then nothing. Nothing more around us, save the scorching silence of the south in the heat of a tropical forest.
End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston LEROUX. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 24. Barrels, barrels, any barrels to sell.
I have said that the room in which Monsieur le Vicomte de Chagny and I were imprisoned was a regular hexagon, lined entirely with mirrors. Plenty of these rooms have been seen since, mainly at exhibitions. They are called Palaces of Illusion, or some such name. But the invention belongs entirely to Erik, who built the first room of this kind under my eyes, at the time of the rosy hours of Mazenderan. A decorative object, such as a column, for instance, was placed in one of the corners, and immediately produced a whole of 1,000 columns. For, thanks to the mirrors, the real room was multiplied by 6 hexagonal rooms, each of which, in its turn, was multiplied indefinitely. But the little Sultana soon tired of this infantile illusion, whereupon Erik altered his invention into a torture chamber. For the architectural motive placed in one corner, he substituted an iron tree. This tree, with its painted leaves, was absolutely true to life, and was made of iron so as to resist all the attacks of the patient who was locked into the torture chamber. We shall see how the scene thus obtained was twice altered instantaneously into 2 successive other scenes, by means of the automatic rotation of the drums or rollers in the corners. These were divided into 3 sections, fitting into the angles of the mirrors, and each supporting a decorative scheme that came into sight as the roller revolved upon its axis. The walls of this strange room gave the patient nothing to lay hold of, because, apart from the solid decorative object, they were simply furnished with mirrors, thick enough to withstand any onslaught of the victim, who was flung into the chamber empty-handed and barefoot. There was no furniture. The ceiling was capable of being lit up. An ingenious system of electric heating, which has since been imitated, allowed the temperature of the walls and room to be increased at will. I am giving all these details of a perfectly natural invention, producing, with a few painted branches, the supernatural illusion of an equatorial forest blazing under the tropical sun, so that no one may doubt the present balance of my brain, or feel entitled to say that I am mad or lying, or that I take him for a fool. I now return to the facts where I left them. When the ceiling lit up and the forest became visible around us, the Viscount's stupefaction was immense. That impenetrable forest, with its innumerable trunks and branches, threw him into a terrible state of consternation. He passed his hands over his forehead, as though to drive away a dream. His eyes blinked, and for a moment he forgot to listen. I have already said that the sight of the forest did not surprise me at all, and therefore I listened for the 2 of us to what was happening next door. Lastly, my attention was specially attracted, not so much to the scene, as to the mirrors that produced it. These mirrors were broken in parts. Yes, they were marked and scratched. They had been starred in spite of their solidity, and this proved to me that the torture chamber in which we now were had already served a purpose. Yes, some wretch, whose feet were not bare like those of the victims of the rosy hours of Mazenderan, had certainly fallen into this mortal illusion, and, mad with rage, had kicked against those mirrors, which, nevertheless, continued to reflect his agony. And the branch of the tree on which he had put an end to his own sufferings was arranged in such a way that, before dying, he had seen, for his last consolation, 1,000 men writhing in his company. Yes, Joseph Buquet had undoubtedly been through all this. Were we to die as he had done? I did not think so, for I knew that we had a few hours before us, and that I could employ them to better purpose than Joseph Buquet was able to do. After all, I was thoroughly acquainted with most of Erik's tricks, and now or never was the time to turn my knowledge to account. To begin with, I gave up every idea of returning to the passage that had brought us to that accursed chamber. I did not trouble about the possibility of working the inside stone that closed the passage, and this for the simple reason that to do so was out of the question. We had dropped from too great a height into the torture chamber. There was no furniture to help us reach that passage. Not even the branch of the iron tree, not even each other's shoulders were of any avail. There was only one possible outlet, that opening into the Louis-Philippe room in which Erik and Christine Daae were. But though this outlet looked like an ordinary door on Christine's side, it was absolutely invisible to us. We must therefore try to open it without even knowing where it was. When I was quite sure that there was no hope for us from Christine Daae's side, when I had heard the monster dragging the poor girl from the Louis-Philippe room, lest she should interfere with our tortures, I resolved to set to work without delay. But I had first to calm Monsieur de Chagny, who was already walking about like a madman, uttering incoherent cries. The snatches of conversation which he had caught between Christine and the monster had contributed not a little to drive him beside himself. Add to that the shock of the magic forest and the scorching heat which was beginning to make the perspiration stream down his temples, and you will have no difficulty in understanding his state of mind. He shouted Christine's name, brandished his pistol, knocked his forehead against the glass in his endeavours to run down the glades of the elusive forest. In short, the torture was beginning to work its spell upon a brain unprepared for it. I did my best to induce the poor Viscount to listen to reason. I made him touch the mirrors, and the iron tree, and the branches, and explained to him, by optical laws, all the luminous imagery by which we were surrounded, and of which we need not allow ourselves to be the victims, like ordinary, ignorant people. We are in a room, a little room. That is what you must keep saying to yourself, and we shall leave the room as soon as we have found the door. And I promised him that, if he let me act, without disturbing me by shouting and walking up and down, I would discover the trick of the door in less than an hour's time. Then he lay flat on the floor, as one does in a wood, and declared that he would wait until I had found the door of the forest, as there was nothing better to do, and he added that from where he was,
the view was splendid.
The torture was working, in spite of all that I had said. Myself, forgetting the forest, I tackled a glass paddle, and began to finger it in every direction, hunting for the weak point on which to press in order to turn the door in accordance with Erik's system of pivots. This weak point might be a mere speck on the glass, no larger than a pea, under which the spring lay hidden. I hunted and hunted. I felt as high as my hands could reach. Erik was about the same height as myself, and I thought that he would not have placed the spring higher than suited his stature. While groping over the successive panels with the greatest care, I endeavoured not to lose a minute, for I was feeling more and more overcome with the heat, and we were literally roasting in that blazing forest. I had been working like this for half an hour, and had finished 3 panels, when, as ill luck would have it, I turned around on hearing a muttered exclamation from the Viscount.
I'm stifling,
he said.
All those mirrors are sending out an infernal heat. Do you think you'll find that spring soon? If you are much longer about it, we shall be roasted alive.
I was not sorry to hear him talk like this. He had not said a word of the forest, and I hoped that my companion's reason would hold out some time longer against the torture. But he added,
What consoles me is that the monster has given Christine until 11 tomorrow evening. If we can't get out of here and go to her assistance, at least we shall be dead before her. Then Erik's mass can serve for all of us.
And he gulped down a breath of hot air that nearly made him faint. As I had not the same desperate reasons as Monsieur le Vicomte for accepting death, I returned, after giving him a word of encouragement, to my panel. But I had made the mistake of taking a few steps while speaking, and in the tangle of the elusive forest I was no longer able to find my panel for certain. I had to begin all over again, at random, feeling, fumbling, groping. Now the fever laid hold of me in my turn, for I found nothing, absolutely nothing. In the next room all was silence. We were quite lost in the forest, without an outlet, a compass, a guide, or anything. Oh, I knew what awaited us, if nobody came to our aid, or if I did not find the spring. But look as I might, I found nothing but branches, beautiful branches that stood straight up before me, or spread gracefully over my head. But they gave no shade, and this was natural enough, as we were in an equatorial forest, with the sun right above our heads, an African forest. Monsieur de Chagny and I had repeatedly taken off our coats, and put them on again, finding at one time that they made us feel still hotter, and at another that they protected us against the heat. I was still making a moral resistance, but Monsieur de Chagny seemed to me quite gone. He pretended that he had been walking in that forest for 3 days and nights without stopping, looking for Christine Daae. From time to time He thought he saw her behind the trunk of a tree, or gliding between the branches, and he called to her with words of supplication that brought the tears to my eyes. And then, at last,
"Oh, how thirsty I am!"
he cried in delirious accents. I too was thirsty. My throat was on fire. And yet, squatting on the floor, I went on hunting for the spring of the invisible door, especially as it was dangerous to remain in the forest as evening drew nigh. Already the shades of night were beginning to surround us. It had happened very quickly. Night falls quickly in tropical countries, suddenly, with hardly any twilight. Now night, in the forest of the equator, is always dangerous, particularly when, like ourselves, one has not the materials for a fire to keep off the beasts of prey. I did indeed try for a moment to break off the branches, which I would have lit with my dark lantern, but I knocked myself also against the mirrors and remembered in time that we had only images of branches to do with. The heat did not go with the daylight. On the contrary, it was still hotter under the blue rays of the moon. I urged the Viscount to hold our weapons ready to fire, and not to stray from camp, while I went on looking for my spring. Suddenly we heard a lion roaring a few yards away.
"Oh!"
whispered the Viscount.
"He's quite close. Don't you see him? There, through the trees, in that thicket. If he roars again, I'll fire."
And the roaring began again, louder than before. And the Viscount fired, but I do not think that he hit the lion. Only he smashed a mirror, as I perceived the next morning at daybreak. We must have covered a good distance during the night, for we suddenly found ourselves on the edge of the desert. An immense desert of sand, stones, and rocks. It was really not worth while leaving the forest to come upon the desert. Tired out, I flung myself down beside the Viscount, for I had had enough of looking for springs which I could not find. I was quite surprised, and I said so to the Viscount, that we had encountered no other dangerous animals during the night. Usually, after the lion came the leopard, and sometimes the buzz of the tsetse fly. These were easily obtained effects, and I explained to Monsieur de Chagny that Erik imitated the roar of a lion on a long tabor or timbrel, with an ass's skin at one end. Over this skin he tied a string of catgut, which was fastened at the middle to another similar string, passing through the whole length of the tabor. Erik had only to rub this spring with a glove smeared with resin, and according to the manner in which he rubbed it, he imitated to perfection the voice of the lion, or the leopard, or even the buzzing of the tsetse fly. The idea that Erik was probably in the room beside us, working his trick, made me suddenly resolve to enter into a parley with him, for we must obviously give up all hope of taking him by surprise. And by this time he must be quite aware who were the occupants of his torture chamber. I called him. "Erik! Erik!" I shouted as loudly as I could across the desert, but there was no answer to my voice. All around us lay the silence and the bare immensity of that stony desert. What was to become of us in the midst of that awful solitude? We were beginning literally to die of heat, hunger, and thirst, of thirst especially. At last I saw Monsieur de Chagny raise himself on his elbow and point to a spot on the horizon. He had discovered an oasis. Yes, far in the distance was an oasis with limpid water, which reflected the iron trees. Tush! It was the scene of the mirage. I recognized it at once, the worst of the three. Not one had been able to fight against it. No one. I did my utmost to keep my head, and not to hope for water, for I knew that, if a man hoped for water, the water reflected the iron tree, and if, after hoping for water, he struck against the mirror, then there was only one thing for him to do, to hang himself on the iron tree. So I cried to Monsieur de Chagny, "It's the mirage! It's the mirage. Don't believe in the water. It's another trick of the mirror." Then he flatly told me to shut up, with my tricks of the mirrors, my springs, my revolving doors, and my palaces of illusions. He angrily declared that I must be either blind or mad to imagine that all that water flowing over there, among those splendid, numberless trees, was not real water. And the desert was real, and so was the forest, and it was no use trying to take him in. He was an old, experienced traveller. He had been all over the place. And he dragged himself along, saying,
"Water! Water!"
And his mouth was open, as though he were drinking. And my mouth was open too, as though I were drinking. For we not only saw the water, but we heard it. We heard it flow. We heard it ripple. Do you understand that word, ripple? It is a sound which you hear with your tongue. You put your tongue out of your mouth to listen to it better. Lastly, and this was the most pitiless torture of all, we heard the rain, and it was not raining. This was an infernal invention. Oh, I knew well enough how Erik obtained it. He filled with little stones a very long and narrow box, broken up inside with wooden and metal projections. The stones, in falling, struck against these projections and rebounded from one to another, and the result was a series of pattering sounds that exactly imitated a rainstorm. Ah, you should have seen us putting out our tongues and dragging ourselves toward the rippling river-bank. Our eyes and ears were full of water, but our tongues were hard and dry as horn. When we reached the mirror, Monsieur de Chagny licked it, and I also licked the glass. It was burning hot. Then we rolled on the floor with a hoarse cry of despair. Monsieur de Chagny put the one pistol that was still loaded to his temple, and I stared at the Punjab lasso at the foot of the iron tree. I knew why the iron tree had returned, in this third change of scene. The iron tree was waiting for me. But as I stared at the Punjab lasso, I saw a thing that made me start so violently that Monsieur de Chagny delayed his attempt at suicide. I took his arm, and then I caught the pistol from him, and then I dragged myself on my knees toward what I had seen. I had discovered, near the Punjab lasso, in a groove in the floor, a black-headed nail of which I knew the use. At last I had discovered the spring. I felt the nail. I lifted a radiant face to Monsieur de Chagny. The black-headed nail yielded to my pressure. And then we saw not a door opened in the wall, but a cellar flap released in the floor. Cool air came up to us from the black hole below. We stooped over that square of darkness as though over a limpid well. With our chins in the cool shade, we drank it in, and we bent lower and lower over the trap-door. What could there be in that cellar which opened before us? Water? Water to drink? I thrust my arm into the darkness and came upon a stone and another stone, a staircase, a dark staircase leading into the cellar. The Viscount wanted to fling himself down the hole, but I, fearing a new trick of the monster's, stopped him, turned on my dark lantern, and went down first. The staircase was a winding one, and led down into a pitchy darkness. But oh, how deliciously cool were the darkness and the stairs! The lake could not be far away. We soon reached the bottom. Our eyes were beginning to accustom themselves to the dark, to distinguish shapes around us, circular shapes, on which I turned the light of my lantern. Barrels! We were in Erik's cellar. It was here that he must keep his wine and perhaps his drinking water. I knew that Erik was a great lover of good wine. Ah, there was plenty to drink here. Monsieur de Chagny patted the round shapes and kept on saying,
"Barrels! Barrels! What a lot of barrels!"
Indeed, there was quite a number of them, symmetrically arranged in 2 rows, one on either side of us. They were small barrels, and I thought that Erik must have selected them of that size to facilitate their carriage to the house on the lake. We examined them successively, to see if one of them had not a funnel, showing that it had been tapped at some time or another. But all the barrels were hermetically closed. Then, after lifting one to make sure it was full, and with the blade of a small knife which I carried, I prepared to stave in the bung-hole. At that moment I seemed to hear, coming from very far, a sort of monotonous chant, which I knew well, from often hearing it in the streets of Paris.
Barrels! Barrels! Any barrels to sell?
My hand desisted from its work. Monsieur de Chagny had also heard. He said,
That's funny. It sounds as if the barrel were singing.
The song was renewed, farther away.
Barrels! Barrels! Any barrels to sell?
No, I swear,
said the Viscount.
that the tune dies away in the barrel.
We stood up and went to look behind the barrel.
It's inside.
Said Monsieur de Chagny.
It's inside.
But we heard nothing there, and were driven to accuse the bad condition of our senses, and we returned to the bung-hole. Monsieur de Chagny put his two hands together underneath it, and with a last effort I burst the bung.
What's this?
Cried the Viscount.
This isn't water.
The Viscount put his two full hands close to my lantern. I stooped to look, and at once threw away the lantern with such violence that it broke and went out, leaving us in utter darkness. What I had seen in Monsieur de Chagny's hands was gunpowder.
End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston LEROUX. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 25. The Scorpion or the Grasshopper? Which?
The discovery flung us into a state of alarm that made us forget all our past and present sufferings. We now knew all that the monster meant to convey when he said to Christine Daae,
Yes or no? If your answer is no, everybody will be dead and buried.
Yes, buried under the ruins of the Paris Grand Opera. The monster had given her until 11 o'clock in the evening. He had chosen his time well. There would be many people, many members of the human race, up there, in the resplendent theatre. What finer retinue could be expected for his funeral? He would go down to the tomb escorted by the whitest shoulders in the world, decked with the richest jewels. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. We were all to be blown up in the middle of the performance, if Christine Daae said no. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. And what else could Christine say but no? Would she not prefer to espouse death itself rather than that living corpse? She did not know that on her acceptance or refusal depended the awful fate of many members of the human race. 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. And we dragged ourselves through the darkness, feeling our way to the stone steps, for the light in the trapdoor overhead that led to the room of mirrors was now extinguished, and we repeated to ourselves, 11 o'clock tomorrow evening. At last I found the staircase, but suddenly I drew myself up on the first step, for a terrible thought had come to my mind. What is the time? Ah, what was the time? For, after all, 11 o'clock tomorrow evening might be now, might be this very moment. Who could tell us the time? We seemed to have been imprisoned in that hell for days and days, for years, since the beginning of the world. Perhaps we should be blown up then and there. Ah, a sound, a crack. Did you hear that? There, in the corner, good heavens, like a sound of machinery. Again. Oh, for a light! Perhaps it's the machinery that is to blow everything up. I tell you, a cracking sound. Are you deaf? Monsieur de Chagny and I began to yell like madmen. Fear spurred us on. We rushed up the treads of the staircase, stumbling as we went, anything to escape the dark, to return to the mortal light of the room of mirrors. We found the trapdoor still open, but it was now as dark in the room of mirrors as in the cellar which we had left. We dragged ourselves along the floor of the torture chamber, the floor that separated us from the powder magazine. What was the time? We shouted, we called, Monsieur de Chagny to Christine, I to Erik. I reminded him that I had saved his life. But no answer, save that of our despair, of our madness. What was the time? We argued, we tried to calculate the time which we had spent there, but we were incapable of reasoning. If only we could see the face of a watch. Mine had stopped, but Monsieur de Chagny's was still going. He told me that he had wound it up before dressing for the opera. We had not a match upon us. And yet we must know. Monsieur de Chagny broke the glass of his watch and felt the two hands. He questioned the hands of the watch with his fingertips, going by the position of the ring of the watch. Judging by the space between the two hands, he thought it might be just 11 o'clock. But perhaps it was not the 11 o'clock of which we stood in dread. Perhaps we had still 12 hours before us. Suddenly I exclaimed, "Hush!" I seemed to hear footsteps in the next room. Someone tapped against the wall. Christine Daae's voice said,
Raoul! Raoul!
We were now all talking at once on either side of the wall. Christine sobbed. She was not sure that she would find Monsieur de Chagny alive. The monster had been terrible. It seemed, had done nothing but rave, waiting for her to give him the yes, which she refused. And yet she had promised him that yes, if he would take her to the torture chamber. But he had obstinately declined, and had uttered hideous threats against all the members of the human race. At last, after hours and hours of that hell, he had that moment gone out, leaving her alone to reflect for the last time.
It is 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock all but 5 minutes. The 11 o'clock that is to decide life or death. He told me so just before he went. He is terrible. He is quite mad. He tore off his mask and his yellow eyes shot flames. He did nothing but laugh. He said,
I give you 5 minutes to spare your blushes. Here.
He said, taking a key from his little bag of life and death.
Here is the little bronze key that opens the 2 ebony caskets on the mantelpiece in the Louis-Philippe room. In one of the caskets you will find a scorpion. In the other a grasshopper, both very cleverly imitated in Japanese bronze. They will say yes or no for you. If you turn the scorpion round, that will mean to me when I return that you have said yes. The grasshopper will mean no.
And he laughed like a drunken demon. I did nothing but beg and entreat him to give me the key of the torture chamber, promised to be his wife if he granted me that request. But he told me there was no future need for that key, and that he was going to throw it into the lake. And he again laughed like a drunken demon, and left me. Oh, his last words were,
The grasshopper! Be careful of the grasshopper! The grasshopper does not only turn, it hops, and it hops jolly high.
The 5 minutes had nearly elapsed, and the scorpion and the grasshopper were scratching at my brain. Nevertheless, I had sufficient lucidity left to understand that if the grasshopper were turned, it would hop, and with it many members of the human race. There was no doubt but that the grasshopper controlled an electric current intended to blow up the powder magazine. Monsieur de Chagny, who seemed to have recovered all his moral force from hearing Christine's voice, explained to her, in a few hurried words, the situation in which we and all the opera were. He told her to turn the scorpion at once. There was a pause. "Christine," I cried. "Where are you?"
By the scorpion.
"Don't touch it." The idea had come to me, for I knew my Erik, that the monster had perhaps deceived the girl once more. Perhaps it was the scorpion that would blow everything up. After all, why wasn't he there? The 5 minutes were long past, and he was not back. Perhaps he had taken shelter and was waiting for the explosion. Why had he not returned? He could not really expect Christine ever to consent to become his voluntary prey. Why had he not returned? "Don't touch the scorpion," I said.
Here he comes,
cried Christine.
I hear him. Here he is.
We heard his steps approaching the Louis-Philippe room. He came up to Christine, but did not speak. Then I raised my voice. "Erik, it is I. Do you know me?" With extraordinary calmness he at once replied.
So, you are not dead in there? Well then, see that you keep quiet.
I tried to speak, but he said coldly,
Not a word, daroga, or I shall blow everything up.
And he added,
The honor rests with Mademoiselle. Mademoiselle has not touched the scorpion.
How deliberately he spoke.
Mademoiselle has not touched the grasshopper.
With that composure.
But it is not too late to do the right thing. There, I open the caskets without a key, for I am a trapdoor lover, and I open and shut what I please, and as I please. I open the little ebony caskets. Mademoiselle, look at the little dears inside. Aren't they pretty? If you turn the grasshopper, mademoiselle, we shall all be blown up. There is enough gunpowder under our feet to blow up a whole quarter of Paris. If you turn the scorpion, mademoiselle, all that powder will be soaked and drowned. Mademoiselle, to celebrate our wedding, you shall make a very handsome present to a few hundred Parisians who are at this moment applauding a poor masterpiece of Meyerbeer's. You shall make them a present of their lives. For, with your own fair hands, you shall turn the scorpion. And merrily, merrily, we shall be married.
A pause, and then,
If in 2 minutes, mademoiselle, you have not turned the scorpion, I shall turn the grasshopper. And the grasshopper, I tell you, hops jolly high.
The terrible silence began anew. The Vicomte de Chagny, realizing that there was nothing left to do but pray, went down on his knees and prayed. As for me, my blood beat so fiercely that I had to take my heart in both hands, lest it should burst. At last we heard Erik's voice.
The 2 minutes are past. Goodbye, mademoiselle. Hop, grasshopper.
Erik,
Cried Christine.
do you swear to me, monster? Do you swear to me that the scorpion is the one to turn?
Yes, to hop at our wedding.
Ah, you see, you said to hop.
At our wedding, ingenuous child. The scorpion opens the ball. But that will do. You don't have the scorpion? Then I turn the grasshopper.
Erik,
Enough!
I was crying out in concert with Christine. Monsieur de Chagny was still on his knees, praying.
Erik, I have turned the scorpion.
Oh, the second through which we passed! Waiting, waiting to find ourselves in fragments amid the roar and the ruins. Feeling something crack beneath our feet, hearing an appalling hiss through the open trapdoor, a hiss like the first sound of a rocket. It came softly at first, then louder, then very loud, but it was not the hiss of fire, it was more like the hiss of water, and now it became a gurgling sound. Gurgle, gurgle. We rushed to the trapdoor. All our thirst, which vanished when the terror came, now returned with the lapping of the water. The water rose in the cellar, above the barrels, the powder barrels.
Barrels, barrels, any barrels to sell?
We went down to it with parched throats. It rose to our chins, to our mouths, and we drank. We stood on the floor of the cellar and drank. And we went up the stairs in the dark, step by step, went up with the water. The water came out of the cellar with us and spread over the floor of the room. If this went on, the whole house on the lake would be swamped. The floor of the torture chamber had itself become a regular little lake, in which our feet splashed. Surely there was water enough now. Erik must turn off the tap.
Erik, that is enough water for the gunpowder. Turn off the tap, turn off the scorpion.
But Erik did not reply. We heard nothing but the water rising. It was halfway to our waists.
Christine!
Cried Monsieur de Chagny.
Christine, the water is up to our knees!
But Christine did not reply. We heard nothing but the water rising. No one in the next room, no one to turn the tap, no one to turn the scorpion. We were all alone in the dark, with the dark water that seized us and clasped us and froze us. Erik!
Christine!
By this time we had lost our foothold and were spinning round in the water, carried away by an irresistible whirl, for the water turned with us and dashed us against the dark mirror, which thrust us back again, and our throats, raised above the whirlpool, roared aloud. Were we to die here, drowned in the torture chamber? I had never seen that. Erik, at the time of the rosy hours of Mazenderan, had never shown me that through the little invisible window. Erik! I cried. I saved your life. Remember, you were sentenced to death. But for me, you would be dead now. Erik! We whirled around in the water like so much wreckage. But suddenly my straying hand seized the trunk of the iron tree. I called Monsieur de Chagny, and we both clung to the branch of the iron tree. And the water rose still higher. Oh, can you remember? How much space is there between the branch of the tree and the dome-shaped ceiling? Do try to remember. After all, the water may stop. It must find its level. There, I think it is stopping. No, oh horrible! Swim for your life. Our arms became entangled with the effort of swimming. We choked. We fought in the dark water. Already we could hardly breathe the dark air above the dark water, the air which escaped, which we could hear escaping through some vent-hole or other. Oh, let us turn and turn and turn until we find the air-hole, and then glue our mouths to it. But I lost my strength. I tried to lay hold of the walls. Oh, how those glass walls slipped from under my groping fingers. We whirled round again. We began to sink. One last effort. A last cry. Erik! Christine! Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle in our ears. Gurgle, gurgle. At the bottom of the dark water our ears went gurgle, gurgle. And before losing consciousness entirely, I seemed to hear, between two gurgles,
Barrels, barrels, any barrels to sell?
End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston LEROUX. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 26. The End of the Ghost's Love Story. The previous chapter marks the conclusion of the written narrative which the Persian left behind him. Notwithstanding the horrors of a situation which seemed definitely to abandon them to their deaths, Monsieur de Chagny and his companion were saved by the sublime devotion of Christine Daae, and I had the rest of the story from the lips of the daroga himself. When I went to see him, he was still living in his little flat in the Rue de Rivoli, opposite the Tuileries. He was very ill, and it required all my ardour as a historian pledged to the truth to persuade him to live the incredible tragedy over again for my benefit. His faithful old servant Darius showed me into him. The daroga received me at a window overlooking the garden of the Tuileries. He still had his magnificent eyes, but his poor face looked very worn. He had shaved the whole of his head, which was usually covered with an astrakhan cap. He was dressed in a long, plain coat, and amused himself by unconsciously twisting his thumbs inside the sleeves. But his mind was quite clear, and he told me his story with perfect lucidity. It seems that when he opened his eyes, the daroga found himself lying on a bed. Monsieur de Chagny was on a sofa beside the wardrobe. An angel and a devil were watching over them. After the deceptions and illusions of the torture chamber, the precision of the details of that quiet little middle-class room seemed to have been invented for the express purpose of puzzling the mind of mortal rash enough to stray into that abode of living nightmare. The wooden bedstead, the waxed mahogany chairs, the chest of drawers, those brasses, the little square antimacassars carefully placed on the backs of the chairs, the clock on the mantelpiece, and the harmless-looking ebony caskets at either end, lastly, the whatnot filled with shells, the red pincushions, with mother-of-pearl boats and an enormous ostrich egg, the whole discreetly lighted by a shaded lamp standing on a small round table. This collection of ugly, peaceable, reasonable furniture at the bottom of the opera cellars bewildered the imagination more than all the late fantastic happenings. And the figure of the masked man seemed all the more formidable in this old-fashioned, neat, and trim little frame. It bent down over the Persian and said in his ear,
"Are you better, daroga? You are looking at my furniture. It is all that I have left of my poor unhappy mother."
Christine Daae did not say a word. She moved about noiselessly, like a sister of charity who had taken a vow of silence. She brought a cup of cordial or of hot tea, he did not remember which. The man in the mask took it from her hands and gave it to the Persian. Monsieur de Chagny was still sleeping. Erik poured a drop of rum into the daroga's cup, and pointing to the Viscount, said,
"He came to himself long before we knew if you were still alive, daroga. He is quite well. He is asleep. We must not wake him."
Erik left the room for a moment, and the Persian raised himself on his elbow, looked around him, and saw Christine Daae sitting by the fireside. He spoke to her, called her, but he was still very weak, and fell back on his pillow. Christine came to him, laid her hand on his forehead, and went away again. And the Persian remembered that as she went, she did not give a glance at Monsieur de Chagny, who, it is true, was sleeping peacefully, and she sat down again in her chair by the chimney-corner, silent as a sister of charity who had taken a vow of silence. Erik returned with some little bottles which he had placed on the mantelpiece, and, again in a whisper so as not to waken Monsieur de Chagny, he said to the Persian, after sitting down and feeling his pulse,
"You are now saved, both of you, and soon I shall take you up to the surface of the earth, to please my wife."
Thereupon he rose, without any further explanation, and disappeared once more. The Persian now looked at Christine's quiet profile under the lamp. She was reading a tiny book with gilt edges, like a religious book. There are editions of the Imitation that look like that. The Persian still had in his ears the natural tone in which the other had said, "to please my wife." Very gently he called her again, but Christine was wrapped up in her book and did not hear him. Erik returned, mixed the daroga a draught, and advised him not to speak to his wife again, nor to anyone, because it might be very dangerous to everybody's health. Eventually the Persian fell asleep like Monsieur de Chagny, and did not wake until he was in his own room, nursed by his faithful Darius, who told him that, on the night before, he was found propped against the door of his flat, where he had been brought by a stranger who rang the bell before going away. As soon as the daroga recovered his strength and his wits, he sent to Count Philippe's house to inquire after the Viscount's health. The answer was that the young man had not been seen, and that Count Philippe was dead. His body was found on the bank of the Opera Lake on the Rue Scribe's side. The Persian remembered the Requiem Mass which he had heard from behind the wall of the torture chamber, and had no doubt concerning the crime and the criminal. Knowing Erik as he did, he easily reconstructed the tragedy. Thinking that his brother had run away with Christine Daae, Philippe had dashed in pursuit of him along the Brussels road, where he knew that everything was prepared for the elopement. Failing to find the pair, he hurried back to the opera, remembered Raoul's strange confidence about his fantastic rival, and learned that the Viscount had made every effort to enter the cellars of the theatre, and that he had disappeared, leaving his hat in the prima donna's dressing-room, beside an empty pistol-case. And the Count, who no longer entertained any doubt of his brother's madness, in his turn darted into that infernal underground maze. This was enough in the Persian's eyes to explain the discovery of the Comte de Chagny's corpse on the shore of the lake, where the siren, Erik's siren, kept watch. The Persian did not hesitate. He determined to inform the police. Now the case was in the hands of an examining magistrate called Faure, an incredulous, commonplace, superficial sort of person, I write as I think, with a mind utterly unprepared to receive a confidence of this kind. Monsieur Faure took down the daroga's dispositions and proceeded to treat him as a madman. Despairing of ever obtaining a hearing, the Persian sat down to write. As the police did not want his evidence, perhaps the press would be glad of it, and he had just written the last line of the narrative I have quoted in the preceding chapters, when Darius announced the visit of a stranger who refused his name, who would not show his face, and who declared simply that he did not intend to leave the place until he had spoken to the daroga. The Persian at once felt who his singular visitor was, and ordered him to be shown in. The daroga was right. It was the ghost. It was Erik. He looked extremely weak and leaned against the wall, as though he were afraid of falling. Taking off his hat, he revealed a forehead as white as wax. The rest of that horrible face was hidden by the mask. The Persian rose to his feet as Erik entered.
Murderer of Count Philippe, what have you done with his brother and Christine Daae?
Erik staggered under this direct attack, kept silent for a moment, dragged himself to a chair, and heaved a deep sigh. Then, speaking in short phrases and gasping for breath between the words,
Daroga, don't talk to me about Count Philippe. He was dead. By the time I left my house, he was dead. When the siren sang, it was an accident, a very sad accident. He fell very awkwardly, but simply and naturally into the lake.
You lie!
shouted the Persian. Erik bowed his head and said,
I have not come here to talk about Count Philippe, but to tell you that I am going to die.
Where are Raoul de Chagny and Christine Daae?
I am going to die.
Raoul de Chagny and Christine Daae?
Of love, Daroga. I am dying of love. That is how it is. Loved her so, and I love her still, Daroga, and I am dying of love for her. I tell you, if you knew how beautiful she was when she let me kiss her alive. It was the first time, Daroga, the first time I ever kissed a woman. Yes, alive. I kissed her alive, and she looked as beautiful as if she had been dead.
The Persian shook Erik by the arm.
Will you tell me if she is alive or dead?
Why do you shake me like that?
asked Erik, making an effort to speak more connectedly.
I tell you that I am going to die. Yes, I kissed her alive.
And now she is dead?
I tell you, I kissed her just like that, on her forehead, and she did not draw back her forehead from my lips. Oh, she is a good girl. As to her being dead, I don't think so, but it has nothing to do with me. No, she is not dead, and no one shall touch a hair of her head. She is a good, honest girl, and she saved your life, daroga, at a moment when I would not have given tuppence for your Persian skin. As a matter of fact, nobody bothered about you. Why were you there with that little chap? You would have died as well as he. My word, how she entreated me for her little chap! But I told her that, as she had turned the scorpion, she had, through that very act, of her own free will, become engaged to me, and that she did not have to have two men engaged to her, which was true enough. As for you, you did not exist. You had ceased to exist, I tell you, and you were going to die with the other. Only mark me, daroga, when you were yelling like the devil because of the water, Christine came to me with her beautiful blue eyes wide open, and swore to me, as she hoped to be saved, that she consented to be my living wife. Until then, in the depths of her eyes, daroga, I had always seen my dead wife. It was the first time I saw my living wife there. She was sincere, as she hoped to be saved. She would not kill herself. It was a bargain. Half a minute later, all the water was back in the lake, and I had a hard job with you, daroga, for, upon my honor, I thought you were done for. However, there you were. It was understood that I was to take you both up to the surface of the earth. When, at last, I cleared the Louis-Philippe room of you, I came back alone.
What have you done with the Vicomte de Chagny?
Asked the Persian, interrupting him.
Ah, you see, daroga, I couldn't carry him up like that at once. He was a hostage. But I could not keep him in the house on the lake either, because of Christine. So I locked him up comfortably. I chained him up nicely. A whiff of the Mazarin scent had left him as limp as a rag. In the communist dungeon, which is in the most deserted and remote part of the opera, below the fifth cellar, when no one ever comes, and when no one ever hears you. Then I came back to Christine. She was waiting for me.
Erik here rose solemnly. Then he continued, but as he spoke he was overcome by all his former emotion, and began to tremble like a leaf.
Yes, she was waiting for me erect and alive, a real living bride, as she hoped to be saved. And when I came forward, more timid than a little child, she did not run away. No, no, she stayed. She waited for me. I even believe, daroga, that she put out her forehead a little. Oh, not much. Just a little, like a living bride. And I kissed her. I. And she did not die. Oh, how good it is, daroga, to kiss somebody on the forehead. You can't tell, but I. My mother, daroga, my poor unhappy mother, would never let me kiss her. She used to run away and throw me my mask, nor any other woman, ever. But you can understand, my happiness was so great, I cried, and I fell at her feet crying, and I kissed her feet, her little feet, crying. You're crying too, daroga, and she cried also. The angel cried.
Erik sobbed aloud, and the Persian himself could not retain his tears in the presence of that masked man, who, with his shoulders shaking and his hands clutched at his chest, was moaning with pain and love by turns.
Yes, daroga, I felt her tears flow on my forehead, on mine. They were soft, they were sweet. They trickled under my mask. They mingled with my tears in my eyes. Yes, they flowed between my lips. Listen, daroga, listen to what I did. I tore off my mask so as not to lose one of her tears, And she did not run away, and she did not die. She remained alive, weeping over me, with me. We cried together. I have tasted all the happiness the world can offer.
And Erik fell into a chair, choking for breath.
Ah, I am not going to die yet. Presently I shall, but let me cry. Listen, Daroga, listen to this. While I was at her feet, I heard her say,
Poor, unhappy Erik.
And she took my hand. I had become no more, you know, than a poor dog ready to die for her. I mean it, Daroga. I held in my hand a ring, a plain gold ring which I had given her, which she had lost, and which I had found again, a wedding ring, you know. I slipped it into her little hand and said, There, take it for you and him. It shall be my wedding present, a present from your poor, unhappy Erik. I know you love the boy. Don't cry any more. She asked me, in a very soft voice, what I meant. Then I made her understand that, where she was concerned, I was only a poor dog, ready to die for her, but that she could marry the young man when she pleased, because she had cried with me, and mingled her tears with mine.
Erik's emotion was so great that he had to tell the Persian not to look at him, for he was choking and must take off his mask. The daroga went to the window and opened it. His heart was full of pity, but he took care to keep his eyes fixed on the trees in the Tuileries garden, lest he should see the monster's face.
I went and released the young man,
Erik continued,
and told him to come with me to Christine. They kissed before me in the Louis-Philippe room. Christine had my ring. I made Christine swear to come back one night when I was dead, crossing the lake from the Rue Riverside, and bury me in the greatest secrecy with the gold ring, which she was to wear until that moment. I told her where she would find my body and what to do with it. Then Christine kissed me for the first time herself, here on the forehead. Don't look, Daroga. Here on the forehead, on my forehead, mine. Don't look, Daroga. And they went off together. Christine had stopped crying. I alone cried. Daroga, Daroga, if Christine keeps her promise, she will come back soon.
The Persian asked him no questions. He was quite reassured as to the fate of Raoul Chagny and Christine Daae. No one could have doubted the word of the weeping Erik that night. The monster resumed his mask and collected his strength to leave the daroga. He told him that when he felt his end to be near at hand, he would send him, in gratitude for the kindness which the Persian had once shown him, that which he held dearest in all the world, all Christine Daae's papers, which she had written for Raoul's benefit and left with Erik, together with a few objects belonging to her, such as a pair of gloves, a shoe-buckle, and 2 pocket-handkerchiefs. In reply to the Persian's questions, Erik told him that the 2 young people, as soon as they found themselves free, had resolved to go and look for a priest in some lonely spot where they could hide their happiness, and that, with this object in view, they had started from the northern railway station of the world. Lastly, Erik relied on the Persian, as soon as he had received the promised relics and papers, to inform the young couple of his death, and to advertise it in the Epoque. That was all. The Persian saw Erik to the door of his flat, and Darius helped him down to the street. A cab was waiting for him. Erik stepped in, and the Persian, who had gone back to the window, heard him say to the driver,
Go to the opera.
And the cab drove off into the night. The Persian had seen the poor unfortunate Erik for the last time. 3 weeks later, the Epoque published this advertisement.
Erik is dead.
End of chapter 26. Epilogue of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston LEROUX. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Epilogue. I have now told the singular but veracious story of the opera Ghost. As I declared on the first page of this work, it is no longer possible to deny that Erik really lived. There are today so many proofs of his existence within the reach of everybody that can follow Erik's actions logically through the whole tragedy of the Chagnys. There is no need to repeat how greatly this case excited the capital. The kidnapping of the artist, the death of the Comte de Chagny under such exceptional conditions, the disappearance of his brother, the drugging of the gas man at the opera and of his two assistants. What tragedies, what passions, what crimes had surrounded the idol of Raoul and the sweet and charming Christine? What had become of that wonderful, mysterious artist whom the world was never, never to hear again? She was represented as the victim of a rivalry between the two brothers, and nobody suspected what had really happened. Nobody understood that as Raoul and Christine had both disappeared, both had withdrawn far from the world to enjoy a happiness which they would not have cared to make public after the inexplicable death of Count Philippe. They took the train one day from the northern railway station of the world. Possibly, I too shall take the train at that station one day, and go and seek around thy lakes, O Norway, O silent Scandinavia, for the perhaps still living traces of Raoul and Christine, and also of Mamma Valerius, who disappeared at the same time. Possibly, some day, I shall hear the echoes of the north repeat the singing of her who knew the angel of music. Long after the case was pigeonholed by the unintelligent care of Monsieur le Juge d'Instruction Phare, the newspapers made efforts at intervals to fathom the mystery. One evening paper alone, which knew all the gossip of the theatres, said,
"We recognize the touch of the opera ghost."
And even that was written by way of irony. The Persian alone knew the whole truth and held the many proofs which came to him with the pious relics promised by the ghost. It fell to my lot to complete these proofs with the aid of the daroga himself. Day by day, I kept him informed of the progress of my inquiries, and he directed them. He had not been to the opera for years and years, but he had preserved the most accurate recollection of the building, and there was no better guide than he possible to help me discover its most secret recesses. He also told me where to gather further information, whom to ask, and he sent me to call on Monsieur Poligny at a moment when my poor man was nearly drawing his last breath. I had no idea that he was so very ill, and I shall not forget the effect which my questions about the ghost produced upon him. He looked at me as if I were the devil, and answered only in a few incoherent sentences, which showed, however, and that was the main thing, the extent of the perturbation which O.G. in his time had brought into the already very restless life, for Monsieur Poligny was what people call a man of pleasure. When I came and told the Persian of the result of my visit to Monsieur Poligny, the daroga gave a faint smile and said,
"Poligny never knew how far that extraordinary blackguard of an Erik humbugged him."
The Persian, by the way, spoke of Erik sometimes as a demigod and sometimes as the lowest of the low.
Poligny was superstitious, and Erik knew it. Erik knew most things about the public and private affairs of the opera. When Monsieur Poligny heard a mysterious voice tell him, in box 5, of the manner in which he used to spend his time and abuse his partner's confidence, he did not wait to hear any more. Thinking at first that it was a voice from heaven, he believed himself damned, and then, when the voice began to ask for money, he saw that he was being victimized by a shrewd blackmailer to whom Debienne himself had fallen a prey. Both of them, already tired of management for various reasons, went away without trying to investigate further into the personality of that curious O.G. who had forced such a singular memorandum book upon them. They bequeathed the whole mystery to their successors, and heaved a sigh of relief when they were rid of a business that had puzzled them without amusing them in the least.
Then I spoke of the two successors, and expressed my surprise that, in his Memoirs of a Manager, M. Moncharmin should describe the opera ghost's behaviour at such length in the first part of the book, and hardly mention it at all in the second. In reply to this, the Persian, who knew the Memoirs as thoroughly as if he had written them himself, observed that I should find the explanation of the whole business if I would just recollect the few lines which Moncharmin devotes to the ghost in the second part aforesaid. I quote these lines, which are particularly interesting because they describe the very simple manner in which the famous incident of 20,000 francs was closed.
As for O.G., some of whose curious tricks I have related in the first part of my memoirs, I will only say that he redeemed by one spontaneous fine action all the worry which he had caused my dear friend and partner, and, I am bound to say, myself. He felt, no doubt, that there are limits to a joke, especially when it is so expensive, and when the commissary of police has been informed, for, at the moment when we had made an appointment in our office with Monsieur Mifroid to tell him the whole story, a few days after the disappearance of Christine Daae, we found, on Richard's table, a large envelope inscribed in red ink.
With O.G.'s compliments.
It contained the large sum of money which he had succeeded in playfully extracting, for the time being, from the treasury. Richard was at once of the opinion that we must be content with that, and drop the business. I agreed with Richard. All's well that ends well. What do you say, O.G.?
Of course, Moncharmin, especially after the money had been restored, continued to believe that he, for a short while, had been the butt of Richard's sense of humour, whereas Richard, on his side, was convinced that Moncharmin had amused himself by inventing the whole affair of the opera ghost in order to revenge himself for a few jokes. I asked the Persian to tell me by what trick the ghost had taken the 20,000 francs from Richard's pocket in spite of the safety pin. He replied that he had not gone into this little detail, but that if I myself cared to make an investigation on the spot, I should certainly find the solution to the riddle in the manager's office by remembering that Erik had not been nicknamed the trap-door lover for nothing. I promised the Persian to do so as soon as I had time, and I may as well tell the reader at once that the results of my investigation were perfectly satisfactory, and I hardly believed that I should ever discover so many undeniable proofs of the authenticity of the feats ascribed to the ghost. The Persian's manuscript, Christine Daae's papers, the statements made to me by the people who used to work under Messieurs Richard and Moncharmin, by little Meg herself, the worthy Madame Giry, I am sorry to say, is no more, and by Sorelli, who is now living in retirement at Louveciennes, all the documents relating to the existence of the ghost, which I propose to deposit in the archives of the opera, have been checked and confirmed by a number of important discoveries of which I am justly proud. I have not been able to find the house on the lake, Erik having blocked up all the secret entrances. On the other hand, I have discovered the secret passages of the Communists, the planking of which is falling to pieces in parts, and also the trap-door through which Raoul and the Persian penetrated into the cellars of the opera house. In the Communist dungeon, I noticed numbers of initials traced on the walls by the unfortunate people confined in it, and among these were an R and a C. R.C. Raoul de Chagny. The letters are there to this day. If the reader will visit the opera one morning and ask leave to stroll where he pleases without being accompanied by a stupid guide, let him go to box 5 and knock with his fist or a stick on the enormous column that separates this from the stage box. He will find that the column sounds hollow. After that, do not be astonished by the suggestion that it was occupied by the voice of the ghost. There is room inside the column for 2 men. If you are surprised that, when the various incidents occurred, no one turned round to look at the column, you must remember that it presented the appearance of solid marble, and that the voice contained in it seemed rather to come from the opposite side, for, as we have seen, the ghost was an expert ventriloquist. The column was elaborately carved and decorated with the sculptor's chisel, and I do not despair of one day discovering the ornament that could be raised or lowered at will, so as to admit of the ghost's mysterious correspondence with Madame Giry, and of his generosity. However, all these discoveries are nothing to my mind, compared with that which I was able to make in the presence of the acting manager in the manager's office, within a couple of inches from the desk chair, and which consisted of a trap-door, the width of a board in the flooring, and the length of a man's forearm, and no longer. A trap-door that falls back like the lid of a box, a trap-door through which I can see a hand come and dexterously fumble at the pocket of a swallow-tail coat. That is the way the 40,000 francs went, and it is also the way by which, through some trick or other, they were returned. Speaking about this to the Persian, I said, "So we may take it, as the 40,000 francs were returned, that Erik was simply amusing himself with that memorandum book of his."
"Don't you believe it,"
he replied.
"Erik wanted money. Thinking himself without the pale of humanity, he was restrained by no scruples, and he employed his extraordinary gifts of dexterity and imagination, which he had received by way of compensation for his extraordinary ugliness, to prey upon his fellow men. His reason for restoring the 40,000 francs, of his own accord, was that he no longer wanted it. He had relinquished his marriage with Christine Daae. He had relinquished everything above the surface of the earth."
According to the Persian's account, Erik was born in a small town not far from Rouen. He was the son of a master mason. He ran away at an early age from his father's house, where his ugliness was a subject of horror and terror to his parents. For a time he frequented the fairs, where a showman exhibited him as the living corpse. He seemed to have crossed the whole of Europe from fair to fair, and to have completed his strange education as an artist and magician at the very fountainhead of art and magic among the gypsies. A period of Erik's life remained quite obscure. He was seen at the fair of Nijni Novgorod, where he displayed himself in all his hideous glory. He had already sang as nobody on this earth had ever sung before. He practised ventriloquism, and gave displays of legerdemain so extraordinary that the caravans returning to Asia talked about it the whole length of their journey. In this way, his reputation penetrated the walls of the palace at Mazanderan, where the little sultana, the favourite of the Shah-in-Shah, was boring herself to death. A dealer in furs, returning to Samarkand from Nijni Novgorod, told of the marvels which he had seen performed in Erik's tent. The trader was summoned to the palace, and the Daroga of Mazanderan was told to question him. Next, the Daroga was instructed to go and find Erik. He brought him to Persia, where for some months Erik's will was law. He was guilty of not a few horrors, for he seemed not to know the difference between good and evil. He took part calmly in a number of political assassinations, and he turned his diabolical inventive powers against the Emir of Afghanistan, who was at war with the Persian Empire. The Shah took a liking to him. This was the time of the rosy hours of Mazanderan, of which the Daroga's narrative has given us a glimpse. Erik had very original ideas on the subject of architecture, and thought out a palace much as a conjurer contrives a trick casket. The Shah ordered him to construct an edifice of this kind. Erik did so, and the building appears to have been so ingenious that His Majesty was able to move about in it unseen and to disappear without a possibility of the tricks being discovered. When the Shah-in-Shah found himself the possessor of this gem, he ordered Erik's yellow eyes to be put out. But he reflected that, even when blind, Erik would still be able to build so remarkable a house for another sovereign, and also that, as long as Erik was alive, someone would know the secret of the wonderful palace. Erik's death was decided upon, together with that of all the labourers who had worked under his orders. The execution of this abominable decree devolved upon the Daroga of Mazanderan. Erik had shown him some slight services, and procured him many a hearty laugh. He saved Erik by providing him with the means of escape, but, nearly paid with his head for his generous indulgence. Fortunately for the Derogas, a corpse, half eaten by the birds of prey, was found on the shore of the Caspian Sea, and was taken for Erik's body, because the Derogas' friends had dressed the remains in clothing that belonged to Erik. The Derogas was let off, with the loss of the imperial favour, the confiscation of his property, and an order of perpetual banishment. As a member of the royal house, however, he continued to receive a monthly pension of a few hundred francs from the Persian treasury, and on this he came to live in Paris. As for Erik, he went to Asia Minor, and thence to Constantinople, where he entered the Sultan's employment. In explanation of the services which he was able to render a monarch haunted by perpetual terrors, I need only say that it was Erik who constructed all the famous trap-doors and secret chambers and mysterious strong boxes which were found at the Yildiz kiosk after the last Turkish Revolution. He also invented those automata, dressed like the Sultan and resembling the Sultan in all respects, which made people believe that the commander of the faithful was awake in one place, when in reality he was asleep elsewhere. Of course, he had to leave the Sultan's service for the same reasons that made him fly from Persia. He knew too much. Then, tired of his adventurous, formidable, and monstrous life, he longed to be someone like everybody else, and he became a contractor, like any ordinary contractor, building ordinary houses with ordinary bricks. He tendered for part of the foundations in the opera. His estimate was accepted. When he found himself in the cellars of the enormous playhouse, his artistic, fantastic, wizard nature resumed the upper hand. Besides, was he not as ugly as ever? He dreamed of creating for his own use a dwelling unknown to the rest of the earth, where he could hide from men's eyes for all time. The reader knows and guesses the rest. It is all in keeping with this incredible and yet veracious story. Poor, unhappy Erik. Shall we pity him? Shall we curse him? He asked only to be someone like everybody else, but he was too ugly. He had to hide his genius, or use it to play tricks with, when, with an ordinary face, he would have been one of the most distinguished of mankind. He had a heart that could have held the empire of the world, and in the end he had to content himself with a cellar. Ah, yes, we must needs pity the opera ghost. I have prayed over his mortal remains, that God might show him mercy notwithstanding his crimes. Yes, I am sure, quite sure, that I prayed beside his body the other day, when they took it from the spot where they were burying the phonographic records. It was his skeleton. I did not recognize it by the ugliness of the head, for all men are ugly when they have been dead as long as that, but by the plain gold ring which he wore, and which Christine Daae had certainly slipped on his finger when she came to bury him in accordance with her promise. The skeleton was lying near a little well, in the place where the angel of music first held Christine Daae fainting in his trembling arms, on the night when he carried her down to the cellars of the opera house. And now, what do they mean to do with that skeleton? Surely they will not bury it in the common grave. I say that the place of the skeleton of the opera ghost is in the archives of the National Academy of Music. It is no ordinary skeleton. End of Epilogue. End of The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston LEROUX.